Welcome back, listeners, to the Academy DEI Podcast. Today, we are thrilled to have Kat Preston Wager with us. Kat is a Workforce Development Supervisor for Adult Protective Services Workforce Innovations, or APSWI. She developed curricula and workforce development resources to strengthen APS programs across the nation, paying close attention to trauma-informed and inclusive training. She is passionate about ensuring those who make up the APS workforce have the tools, confidence, and practice they need to allow them to do their best work. Kat has over 15 years of experience working with survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence with specialized skills in crisis intervention, motivational interviewing, advocacy, case management, and facilitation. Kat is a former sexual assault response coordinator for the Department of the Navy and began her career as a prevention educator for a rape crisis and domestic violence agency. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kat Preston Wager.
Hi,
Hi,
thank you.
Kat.
Hello, thank you both for having me here and for sharing that. It's always so interesting listening to your bio. You're like, oh, yeah, that is a part of who I am. So
Yeah,
thank you
you
for
did all
sharing
that.
that.
Very good. All right, I'm going to start with our first question, Kat. So, what brought you, that's in reference to your bio, what brought you to this line of work and why are you passionate?
I like this question because, again, it gets me to reflect on both personal and lived experience. So, when it comes to anything in the health and human services field and profession, and especially now here at the Academy, I really have learned throughout life that almost everybody, and I would argue everybody, has experienced some form of trauma in their life. I am also really drawn to folks who have experienced some form of abuse as that part of trauma. I'm super passionate about making sure that folks have services, making folks sure that folks have resources, education, informed consent. And so now being able to work with people who serve folks who are experiencing trauma is just like a blessing to me. I get to still be involved in that. I really also am excited that instead of just working with people who are experiencing trauma, people who are experiencing a need for services or a desire for services, that we at the Academy for Professional Excellence get to help and support those who are then serving and providing services and interventions and resources to those experiencing some form of abuse, neglect, or exploitation in different ways. So I get really happy to just continue that journey of my career, if that makes sense. So starting in that kind of crisis world, really giving those direct services, and then now being able to remove myself, but still support that work. More in about like, why am I passionate about just trauma informed, person centered, that type of framework and thinking is I really, as I grew, started to go, hey, we are not robots. Like we are human beings and we can't like turn off this personal and professional. I think that's such a common theory in different cultures, in different generations, in different work settings, that you are a professional and you are a person, and those need to be separated. And it's just really not possible. We come into a workplace with our whole selves, and that can include stuff experienced in the past, but it also can be stuff that we're experiencing now. And I'm not sure that folks usually remember that. So that's another kind of reason why I'm passionate just about just this trauma-informed perspective and how to practice from a trauma-informed care perspective. I'm going to keep going if that's okay. Another reason why I'm super passionate about this is that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and as you stated in my bio, Shane, I have been able to I've seen it. I've sometimes been the first person they've shared something with. I've been somebody to be at a hospital with them, somebody to be in a courtroom with them, somebody to see them afterwards. And it became a part of who I am professionally. But then that also leads me to it is who I am personally. I am a trauma survivor myself. So being able to connect all of that, who I am, working with people directly and then being able to serve others, and knowing that in an environment, there are people all around me who are professionals who are also trauma survivors. So bringing that all together is really important to me. We spend a ton of time in our workplace. Even working from home, you're still with colleagues, you're still doing work. And if you think about your entire life when you start a job, whether it's, babysitting at 12 years old or getting your first career, a lot of your life is spent at work with people. And I think going back to that, we're not personal or professional, we're both. That's important to know when we're spending all of our time with people who are not necessarily in our personal life. They are in our professional life. So this is where I gravitate towards. Give me all the talks about this. Give me all the readings about this. Give me all the experience. So I hope that answered your question about why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you. And you have mentioned a couple of times the word trauma. And so to help really center our conversation a little
Mm.
bit more, can you share a little bit more about how you would define trauma for our listeners?
Yes. Thank you, Charlie. And I appreciate your emphasis on how you would define, because when you look up what is trauma, there's a gazillion different types of definitions and how people relate to that. For me, and for what I'm going to share today, I really think of trauma as something where somebody has been threatened with something, caused them great fear, maybe even some type of close to harm or death. So either feeling that fear that they were close to harm or death, or physically being close to harm or death. And those things shape your brain chemistry. And I'm not quite sure that people who experience trauma, they are not really getting that this has now shaped your brain chemistry. It has gotten ingrained into your body. There's a fabulous book that many people reference a lot about the body doesn't forget, or the body always remembers. And that's just so true. Like, it's in your brain, it's in your fiber of who you are. So with that, with trauma and like being that fear or threat or experiencing fear, harm, death, it also can be that something is happening too fast, too much, and too soon. And we're not ready for it. It was a complete shift of where we thought we were going. Um, I also think about moral injuries. That was an expression brought to me when I worked for the Navy, this moral injury. And I was like, woof, where we as human beings, we have these ingrained morals and these beliefs and these values. And sometimes a trauma can be something that completely goes against that, hurts that, shifts that. So really it can be about like what's ingrained in us. So some betrayal of your morals in that. I also want to highlight, as I mentioned, there's a gazillion definitions of trauma. I also want to be mindful that there's different types of trauma. And there's complex trauma where things are not resolved. It's continued, especially from adolescence. There's workplace trauma, things that are happening in a workplace, whether it's workplace violence or workplace fear or betrayal, relationship trauma, so intimate partner or family, as well as psychological, physical trauma, generational trauma, historical trauma, and then vicarious trauma, which a lot of us in this field of work, and especially here at the Academy for Professional Excellence, we might be working through is vicarious trauma. So maybe not experiencing it firsthand, but experiencing it through others. And then there's a combination of all of that, right? Somebody could have multiple forms of that. So I just want listeners to know that my lens really is, in my experience, is mostly about intimate partner relationship and violence, and then even such things as active shooter within school settings. That's when I identify as a trauma survivor, that's mostly where I'm coming from. And I welcome if either one of you want to share anything about your definitions or how you would say that what trauma means. And you don't have to.
Yeah. I think you did a really good job defining trauma and from your perspective. And you hit on a lot of different types of trauma, which I think is really important. And I think a little bit towards the end, you're hitting on or referencing like intersectional trauma, like different ways that different traumas might intersect with different parts of your identity.
Mm.
So, from that perspective of we've all experienced trauma at some point, why is it important for the workplace to be trauma informed?
Yeah, thank you, Shane. I mentioned earlier, we're not these robots. We come into a workplace, we're there for 6, 8, 12 hours, whatever your shift will be, and you're bringing yourself to there. And I think in a workplace, as a staff member, you come in and you have certain expectations. There is some societal norms and expectations of how you do work, how you're supposed to show up. Maybe that's you're on time and you log in right away and you look at your calendar. There's these expectations about what productivity means, as well as we might show that, oh, I have to have this filter. Like I need to be in this position and I need to filter myself. And those might all be true. And those might be things that people do as coping mechanisms as well. But it also might be something that kind of rubs up against what a trauma survivor might be comfortable doing. So just think it impacts how we show up at work. And so the other thing is that when people are experiencing trauma, again, we're professionals, we're adults. A lot of times we think of what we came here with, but something could be happening right now. Something could have happened last night. Something could have happened this morning. And I'm coming to work, and that might impact how I show up at work. Where my colleagues may not know that. They have no clue what happened on my way, on my phone, at my home in the morning. And so it impacts how I relate to you and then how you relate to me. And it can impact our relationship. Could be said and done in a meeting, in an email, in a G chat, and taken way out of context because of how that person is in that moment. It also is that folks may need different accommodations. They may need to ask for things. They may need to ask to not be sitting with their back towards a door. I'm in my office right now, so I'm looking at my door. They may not need to have a window, or they may need to have a window. There are certain things that people might be asking for, and also that employers could offer, so it wasn't on the person to necessarily ask for. I'm trying to think of why else I think it's important for people in a workplace specifically to be trauma informed. I think it also just really shapes incredible productivity and a sense of community, right? If you can show up, if you can be safe, if you can feel respected, if you can feel that mutual collaboration and empowerment and choice, you're likely to be producing amazing work and like wanting to stay and being passionate about where you are. And like, isn't that kind of what all employers would want, is folks who are like wanting to be there? So I think it's beneficial to the staff themselves. I think it's beneficial to a company and an organization to be trauma informed.
Yeah, you got me thinking on something that's been bouncing in my mind, which is it leans a little bit to like being able to honor the fact that like others do have that experience of trauma. Like there's that, I don't want to say like an assumption, but just like having in mind that, hey, folks may be coming in with different types of trauma. And there isn't necessarily an expectation to have to talk about it or share
Mm,
about it, which I think that's what employers may think, where it's like, oh, hey, if you got something going on, you have to tell me or else I can't help you. But it's really not so much that. It's about how do we still honor folks and care for them and still be able to have a healthy trauma-informed workplace. So I'm not sure if is that something you can talk through a little bit more, which is like how can that still be fostered
mm.
without necessarily needing to have to disclose?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of maybe some of my past history of either oversharing or not sharing at all. And I think you're right, Charlie, that if you come into a workplace, or if you've already been in there and you're starting to do work and people are talking about this, you may have this, what? They want me to say what I've experienced? And that would be like the opposite, right? That would be re-traumatizing. And that's what the opposite of trauma-informed work is. We don't want to ever give the impression that somebody has the pressure to share or to disclose in like paperwork or anything like that. But I think there are things that can happen where you are assumed that when I'm working with somebody, let me go back, Charlie, because I don't know if we've really looked at the trauma-informed care, right? Some of the principles of safety and collaboration and mutuality and cultural and gender and historical issues, choice, empowerment. So those are things that we want to look for as an organization. Instead of giving the impression to somebody, hey, we're a trauma-informed organization, we need to know what traumas you've experienced, can you please share? We instead practice from and we insert behaviors that give people choice and empowerment and safety and honor their cultural and historical and gender identities and concerns so that the work's almost done for them. They don't have to share. I think there can be places to share if appropriate, if the person feels appropriate. We also run into oversharing. Us survivors sometimes like to overshare a little bit. And that's also where then boundaries come into play, whether that's with my colleague or a supervisor or a direct report. But I appreciate you bringing that up, Charlie, that sometimes it can give the impression that tell us what you're going through. We want to know. But then also making sure that people are aware of other resources out there, right? Their EAP, whether that's things obviously through work or other resources where they can get help and support where it's not necessarily from their supervisor or from their colleagues. I'm not quite sure I answered your question, Charlie.
No, you did. You definitely did. Because then I love how you emphasize like there is that those aspects that promote, like you said, safety, collaboration, empowerment, and choice. Because, that's an experience that nobody else can even come close to understanding. But it's being able to cultivate that space where anyone can show up to how they would feel safe in that
Mhm.
environment, to where they can feel like, yes, I can be in this work. Some of it may be activating, some of it may be feeling as though like my trauma is coming into the space. However, I have the support of my team members, my supervisor, my workplace that's going to allow me to feel empowered.
I'm so glad that you said that and brought it up. I want to mention too, when we were talking about like why is trauma informed practice important in the workplace, something that's been coming up for me in the past couple of years, both as a staff and then also having other collaborations or direct reports, is this sometimes when people come in to anywhere, but we're talking about a workplace here, and they've experienced or are experiencing trauma, it can impact their ability to critically think. And I think that's such a skill and that's valued, right? We want folks to be able to critically think and come up with solutions and solution focused on their own or with a little bit of support. And that can be super, super challenging sometimes. And I say that because if you're somebody who either grew up in a home or had a relationship or even a previous workplace where you were told repeatedly that you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, you're dumb, or forms of being gaslit, they may not feel that they have the skills to critically think through things. So sometimes you can get like at a standstill, either in a meeting with peers or colleagues or with a supervisor, where you're being asked to do this where you've suppressed it for so long. And you suppressed it also because you were told to, and then you suppressed it because it was a coping mechanism. And that's how you survived, was I'll just shut up. I just won't say things. And so that can show up in a workplace. And I think that can get mistaken for, oh, you don't have the skills to work here, or you're not putting in the effort. So I think those are kinds of things to also be aware of. I know a lot of folks have been talking, I don't know, in the past couple of years, probably maybe more about imposter syndrome. And I just would like say that it feels sometimes a higher level with people who have experience and are still working through trauma in their life is I'm not good enough. People are going to find me out because a lot of times you're hiding that stuff from other people. You don't want other people to know. So then you go into a job and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing and I can't ask for help because then people are going to find me out. And Charlie, this kind of goes back to what you were saying with balancing that we are trauma informed, but you don't need to tell us, is you can also have various ways for people to ask for help and encourage that and model it yourself so that people can see that it is okay to ask for help. And that's actually how we get unstuck in places.
I think like relating what we're talking about to our DEI efforts, a lot of the conversations we've had in reference to marginalized communities is they don't have to be the only ones that advocate for themselves or their needs. Like it is on the onus of the organization and the people around them to educate themselves and to allow people to show up however they are coming with like the multitudes that make them who they are. And that I think relates a lot to trauma-informed care as well. Yes, a trauma survivor can say, hey, I prefer having a window or I want to be facing the door or ask for those accommodations. But the organization can also get ahead of that and offer choice, like you mentioned, to empower the individual to have a workplace that doesn't continue to re-traumatize or continue to make it difficult for them to be a productive worker in the workplace.
Absolutely, Shane. I'm glad that you're bringing in too the work, especially that the Academy's been doing, the Academy for Professional Excellence has been doing around. Um, it's not up to the person in who's experiencing either the oppression, they're at the other end of the power and the privilege. It's not up to them to necessarily ask. It's really like, how can we do that? And how can we assume and make that available as the organization? I think the organization can do a lot of groundwork in understanding about the principles of trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practice and kind of have policies in place, have discussions that are happening, have things available, and really understanding what is psychological safety, how do we foster that, what is physical safety, whether that also be about not just your shared space, right, like your office space, but the space around you, the hallways, the exit signs, all that kind of stuff. And you mentioned about choice. Really, when we think of trauma, like folks have been not given choice. And in fact, like the power and the privilege has been exerted on them in some way, shape, or form. So as an organization trying to shift that yes, in an organization, there is hierarchy, there's power, there's privilege, there's power and privilege in every single interaction. But shifting that a little bit and allowing somebody to have choice in their schedule, allowing somebody to have choice in how they absorb information, and being able to feel that they're a collaborative member of a decision or of a meeting or of a processy, those types of things. So I think it is a lot of groundwork on the organization, on supervisors as a team. Doesn't even have to be somebody in a power position. It can be within the team itself. What can we do ahead of time? And then always reevaluating that, right? Is this working? Are we missing something? Who is not here that we should be talking to? That kind of stuff.
So I think we've talked a lot about what we can do as an organization to meet people where they are. I think with any sort of new framework, it's important to introduce balance as well, to not lean too far in one direction or the other. And we are still a business. We do still have deliverables and outcomes that we need to be held accountable to. Can you talk a bit about how you can distinguish what is harmful and what is uncomfortable and could actually be worked through?
Yeah, when you said One Direction, I wanted to sing a One Direction song, but I won't because I don't think the listeners would appreciate that. This is a tough one, and I don't know if I have all of the answers, and I welcome either of you to share as well, because I do feel that we can go one way or the other, right? We can be very, no, we're doing it this way. We got to get stuff done. Put your feelings aside. Or we can go the complete other way of pause and just work through this, but then work isn't getting done. Or you're now impeding on somebody else's boundaries and somebody else's work. And that is a rub. So when you talk about balance, I'm not sure I found it 100%, but I think that we really look at things can be uncomfortable. Doesn't necessarily mean they're activating. And what is our, I'm going to say bandwidth for uncomfortableness, right? How long can we sit in this uncomfortable moment? How long can we talk about this in an uncomfortable moment before it gets to what's really activating or where somebody needs to absolutely take a break or do work through their coping and self-regulation skills. So I think knowing that, I think some of it is just asking and having conversations around it and giving permission. I want to I want to acknowledge that this world event or political event is happening right now. It might be really distracting, but you might be concerned. Can we find other places to talk about that? How can we acknowledge that and still at the same time make sure that we are focusing on our contracts and the deliverables? I also really think that structure, accountability, boundaries are being trauma informed. Trauma informed isn't whatever, have at it, your way only. It is also about that collaboration, right? This is what I need, and this is what I need or we need. Let's work out let's look at what works for all of us. So I do think that we can still absolutely have boundaries. We can still absolutely have accountability. We can absolutely still have structure with acknowledging, recognizing, asking about, checking in on, do you want to share? Giving that person permission. And also what one of my boss says, and I like steal this all the time, is, and it's okay to say no. I'm going to ask this and it's okay to say no. Or here's an opportunity, it's okay to say no. Or it's okay to ask more questions about it so you can make informed decisions. I think that's also the nice balance. I know we're talking about the organization having that balance, but I also think it's up to the individual. There is self-responsibility, right? And we can't assume that everybody has worked and has gone to therapy or done their spiritual work or done their whatever to go through it. So they may not have all of those tools. It is still on them to be responsible to do what they need to do to work, to be in this work setting. So that's the awareness for them, being aware what activates me. I don't want to be in a closed room with a certain demographic person. If that activates me, I need to be aware of that and then maybe ask for some support ahead of time. That can we do this in an open space? Can we have a second person there? Those kinds of things. So I do think it's also up on the individual and then knowing that what are my regulation in this? Is this something that I can work through and be uncomfortable and say I'm uncomfortable? And is this something that I need to stop and come back to and find another way to handle this? Or I can't, I need to take that completely off of my table and here's somebody else. I also think as an organization and in a team or a interaction, we can name stuff, right? I think if we see people who are now completely looking away because you're discussing something or something came up or they've gotten some news, or people whose leg is shaking uncontrollably or biting their nails, any kinds of things, especially if it's out of character, right? Some people have these habits, that's who they are, but especially if it's out of character, we can say, I'm seeing you doing this. Do you want to stop? Can you tell me more about that? What do you need right now? I love that question. What do you need right now to be able to engage in this? And again, they might say, I need a break. I don't want to. Or I just needed you to acknowledge it. So those kinds of things. So awareness from the individual themselves, and then awareness from the coworkers or supervisor or facilitator, whatever that be. We're talking about the balance. I'm interested if what I shared brought anything to you all too about the balance, because both of you, we all have deliverables, we all have things that we have to do, and we're here to serve. And I welcome if you have any healthy balance as well.
A lot of what you're talking about, I'm thinking about some of the different principles that we've adopted at the Academy. And one of those, or just ways of being with one another, are the bandwidth check-ins. So like before meeting and before getting into spaces with one another, we check in with each other and see how we're doing as people and what we're bringing. And it's not ever a reflection on how interested in the work we're doing or dedication to the work, but it's literally just like, how are you? And are you here? Are you able to bring what you need to this meeting? And I think that's a good way of putting trauma-informed care into practice. And it doesn't have to take long. It's a quick, like we typically just put a number 1 through 4 in the chat box and review it and recognize, okay, if this person's at a 1, let's expect their input to be about a 1 and not try to pull them to a 4. If it's a 4, maybe let them lead the meeting, give them the space. So I think that's one way that we've operationalized trauma-informed care. I'm also thinking about the multicultural guidelines that we've adopted, but I'm curious to hear from Charlie a little bit about his perspective on this.
Yeah, I think the word that's been really ringing in my mind has been choice. And I think that's a really healthier way of the alternative word being control. Because I would imagine anybody who's gone through experience of trauma has had this sentiment of whatever has been done to me or whatever I didn't receive has now impacted me. And I've lost that sense of control or choice. And so being able to offer that in a workplace environment can be empowering because it's something that person that was taken away from them or they didn't have that. And so that kind of resonates in my mind. And then the other part that resonates in my mind too is my background as in the therapy world and then bringing in that into my role here at the Academy as a supervisor. I really think about what are the spaces where, say, like my direct reports or the people I interact with most have that sense of psychological safety and ability to show up as who they are and be able to do the work. And I take that as a responsibility onto myself as a supervisor to be able to cultivate that within my team. And I also have to recognize like, and it may not always be me either. There may be others that they can turn to, other spaces where they feel like, hey, you know what? I have that ability to show up more as myself or have less of an impact. And I honor that too. Like there's this sort of this responsibility where I want to be able to cultivate that at least, whether that might be connecting with them in ways that they feel safe or finding ways to have honest conversations to help work through things. And I'm okay to let go of some of that responsibility in case other spaces can be more of that for them.
I'm like hearing and like having physical reactions to both of you, Shane. I'm really grateful that you brought in the bandwidth check-ins and really how to use them, right? And what they mean. And even if you were supposed to facilitate the meeting, but you're at a 1, other people can jump in and go, hey, do you want me to take over here? That's support. And I would add to that too, the feelings. It's sometimes to me more helpful to know that the people around me in a room, if we're trying to work on an initiative or a decision or just having a meeting or a discussion, it's helpful to me that you're showing up irritated. That kind of can tell me more sometimes than a 1 or a 2, but I like them both together personally because I want to know it all. And then Charlie, you're talking about choice being the opposite of that control, and that it doesn't have to be me, and I'm okay with that. If you need to get some support, get an idea, get guidance from somebody else, I'm okay with that. And that's like super, I don't know, that made my tummy and heart warm. Like I felt it all here. And I thank you both for bringing that up. Something you said, and I'm trying to remember now, it's going back to the choice. Okay. And again, Charlie, how you said it was just like so beautiful. I think things that anybody can do, again, doesn't have to be a supervisor, doesn't have to be leadership, is providing structure in some way, because a lot of times folks didn't have structure. Things weren't, you never knew what was going to happen. Everything was unexpected. It all came as a surprise. Or think about people who have experienced like a one-time violent experience that completely shifted who they were. So structure can be helpful, like agendas can be helpful. And I know sometimes folks go, but then it's too structured. But a lot of times, like people can't enter a space and not know at least an overview of what's happening or what they could expect. So really, and that's again, finding that balance, Shane, that you were talking about earlier, not having no agenda with no times and we'll see how it goes. And then having an agenda where it's nope, we're moving on. Finding that balance, I think, is really important. I also think like having access to information and interactions as a workplace, because again, somebody could have never that those could have been taken away from them. Access to information could have been taken away from them. Access to interactions could have been taken away from them. So whatever an organization can do, again, with balance, right? I don't get to know everything that's being done. There's HR reasons, there's other certain reasons, but having some type of access to information is super helpful. Having some type of access to interactions. Like I realize it, I can't come to work and just talk to my peers all day about 90 Day Fiance. I get that. However, having some types of interactions are nice in the workplace because I may not get that other places, or I may not have had that in the past. And then just checking in. I do think a lot of times folks are afraid to check in and then let that other person lead. So Charlie, you were saying like about earlier, we don't want to re-traumatize somebody and say, tell me what you're going through right now. But giving kind of those open-ended questions like I'm here for you, or these are your resources, or please seek out somebody else if it's uncomfortable or not safe to talk to me about that right now. So I know we went along about balance and what we can do, and I love it. Let's talk about it all day.
Yeah. And I wanted to add, since we're just adding on more to the bandwidth question, that there's another thing I also do in meetings now is I'll separate just how I'm showing up, whether it's physically, cognitively, emotionally. So I'll have a number for those, just because there are times where like people will show up in different ways. Like they could be feeling physically great, but let's just say they came out of 5 other meetings prior to, cognitively they're just be tapped, or let's just say something that they're going on at home personally, they may be feeling emotionally impacted. And so
Mm.
I think having a sense of that for myself, but also to share with others, has also helped me too.
I am so glad you shared that, and I'm going to take that if that's okay, if I have your permission.
I hadn't heard of that. That's brilliant, Charlie. And I think having those conversations allows us to build safety, which we've been highlighting throughout this conversation. And then once we've built safety within our relationships with our coworkers, we can move into spaces that might be a bit uncomfortable because
Mm.
we've built this foundation, this common ground. We know that we're safe and we can try on new ideas or concepts and talk through things. But in order to get to that place, we need to first be able to check in with one another and hold space for one another and allow people to come with their full self, physically and mentally and emotionally. So I think that's really beautiful.
And can I add to that, Shane? Sorry. You touched on something about the foundation needs to be safety, and that takes some time. I sometimes worry about new folks, where for people who have the privilege to have been here for a while and taken different courses and had conversations, this might come a little bit easier and it might be a little bit more welcomed. And then you've got a new team member or somebody who comes in and we're like doing bandwidth check-ins. No, what? Why are we doing this? And explaining some of that, and then also giving permission that they may not be ready for that right now because from their perspective and probably from reality, it the psychological safety hasn't been built yet. So keeping that in mind too.
Oh my gosh, that's a great thing that you brought up. I feel like that's something I often think about too, because even in my own experience from previous roles before coming to the academy, like I've had more instances where I don't want to say like it's re-traumatizing, like just a different work environment where like productivity and efficiency was more of the top priority as opposed to staff wellness. And so coming to the academy, it's a complete shift. And it does take some time really adjusting to that. And I'm also a firm believer of, I use this word a lot in my therapeutic spaces, is like having corrective experiences. So having experiences over time that are going to feel more healing and more just moving further away from those trauma experiences. Not to say that it's going to be all healing, but it's more so like having these corrective experiences that are going to start to balance a little bit of that out.
I love this. Charlie dropping knowledge, corrective experiences, different types of bandwidth check-ins.
So I'm feeling that now that we start to kind of transition into sort of the end of our time today, I think one of the things that maybe we can explore a little bit more together is seeing, okay, there is that, we've referenced it a little bit, like some folks may experience some of that trauma that could be happening in their home currently, and so they may turn to potentially their workplace being a safe space. And so how does one who could be experiencing that in their life navigate their workplace in a way that, just given those circumstances?
I like this. Thank you for asking because I think it brings up for me two things. Number one, that I am who I am, I've got what I've got, and it may or may not show up in different spaces at work. It also brings up that work could be the actual safe place for me, where being at home, being in my neighborhood, being somewhere isn't safe. And so I actually want to stay longer at work, or I want to be in the office around people who make me feel safe. I just want to honor that two things are coming up for me. But I do think that I was talking earlier about accountability on the individual. And I think something that we can do is, again, having the awareness, checking in with ourselves and owning that, and maybe not separate the personal from the professional. That's not what I'm trying to say here, but how can we separate the physical and the emotional? So if we are feeling activated in the moment, or if we are going into a meeting or a training, either we're receiving a training or providing a training that could be activating, saying out loud to ourselves or writing it down or having a meditative moment of, I am at work. This is not the place that caused me the trauma. If that's the case, I'm going to be okay in this moment. And saying it out loud. When I used to work with some of my sailors that somebody had sexually assaulted them and they had to still continue to work, and sometimes it was near and with the offender, but they didn't want to report, or it was an ongoing case and all this kind of stuff. Something I do is about protective colors, thinking of a color that makes you feel strong or protected or calm or safe, and then drawing that color around you. So it from head to toe, all over your body, all the way down to your feet, so that you have this, I've got a protection on me, like I've got some goodness around me and I can handle these interactions. Again, it's not trying to avoid the interactions. It's what can I do to be safe in these interactions? And this is all given the fact that the workplace isn't the place where you're experiencing the trauma. That would be something that I think that we can do And then there's a gazillion other types of coping mechanisms that people do, even if it's just like grab a really cold drink of water, smelling a lemon to shift your brain and when it's being activated, those kinds of things. But I'm thinking about stuff that you might be able to do to prevent being activated or to be able to really engage in that day or that interaction or meeting. And then following up, following through, right? We've got support system, we've got other resources out there that can support us in order to maintain that balance of I want to still work, I want to be able to do my job, I don't want to leave, and things that I do here sometimes activate me. I'll also, can I say one more thing? Sorry. I'm thinking of my role as a workforce development supervisor. Sometimes we ask other people to be a part of our project. So learning and experience design team or a program assistant. And the topic of the curriculum is rough. We do stuff for adult protective services. And I try to give that information ahead of time. Hey, this is about caregiver neglect, or this is about domestic violence. I want you to know that you can say no to this project. I can find somebody that is able to do those kinds of things. So giving those just like content warnings and letting then the person to say, no, I'm good, or I can do it, or if I need to stop, I'll let you know. So that again, sharing, collaboration, choice.
We're running out of time, and I want to ask you a million more questions. So I'm doing my best to try to prioritize how we close this out. I'm gonna ask one question, and I think the last one will just be a quick one. So we're doing this podcast on diversity, equity, inclusion, and integration of those principles into the academy and how we can support our stakeholders and other organizations and their DEI efforts. And I have to think that folks who may be new to the concept of trauma-informed care may not see the through line to the DEI effort so clearly. So could you help us relate trauma-informed care to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yes, thank you for wrapping this up, and I will try to note this. I really think that trauma-informed care is exactly what diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are. I don't see them separate at all. And I understand how people can, right? That there's this thought of what diversity is, equity, and inclusion. I think that it's woven in all of those, that truly, when we talk about diversity, we're recognizing people's differences and what they bring, and that we have a variety of experiences, knowledge, abilities, skill, expertise. Recognizing that trauma is a part of that would be, to me, bringing diversity in the not forefront, but it would be practicing in a diverse manner. I think when we look at equity, we're looking at what does the person need, right? What I need might be different than Shane, than different than Charlie. So not giving us the exact same. That is trauma informed. We talked about choice, that Shane might need the window. I might not need the window. So being able to do that to me is being equitable. And inclusion, really all of the principles of trauma informed about collaboration, gender and historical and cultural issues, and acknowledging that safety, empowerment, those all are about inclusion to me, and being able that people, no matter who they are, where they're from, what they've experienced, what they are experiencing, can belong here. So if you're an organization that practices from a trauma-informed care, you are then being inclusive. It allows me to feel that I have a place here, that I can contribute, and that I really can thrive, that I'm respected, and that I'm safe. To me, that is all diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Said, thank you so much, Kat, just for your time, your lived expertise, and just your whole self today. Really appreciate having you on today as our guest.
I was gonna say, you two have been amazing. I'm just so thrilled to be able to have this experience. I Yeah, Shane, let's just keep going. No, I know we have to stop.
If only I could say that, oh, we'll have an extended version for our audience if they, but unfortunately we don't. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us on today's episode as we explored the intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, and trauma in the workplace. We hope you find this discussion as enlightening and inspiring as we did. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts who are making a difference in the world of DEI. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay committed to making the world a more inclusive place.
Hmm.